Hi, this is your buddy Quinn, and welcome to the introduction to the 2006 German film, The Lives of Others. The Lives of Others in German is Das Leben der Anderen, and the film is directed by Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck. The Lives of Others is a slow-burning, but I think remarkably effective political thriller set in East Berlin during communist rule in 1984. And the plot is quite simple. It's a plot revolving around German state security agents that are listening into potential enemies of state looking for acts of subversion. It's about spying on the lives of others and what we learn about life in the process of doing that. The film is 2 hours and 17 minutes long. It's a pretty easy film to find, to rent streaming. You can certainly do that on Amazon and other sources. The film does deal with some quite difficult themes, so you maybe want to be careful about who the audience for the film is, in particular watching it with young audiences. It also has some sexual content, so you could choose to filter that out by using a filtering service such as VidAngel. Very specifically, there are 2 scenes with sexual content that are about 2 minutes long each at minute 41 and at minute 48 in the film. And I've noted those in the written details in the introduction to the video so that you can reference those times. These are very easy to skip through on your own, and they're not essential to the plot. Other scenes that have some sexual content are more suggestive than they are explicit, and they are more central to the plot, so I suggest not filtering out those scenes from the film. I will first, in this introduction, discuss a little bit of the historical context of this film, what's going on in East Germany in 1984. I'll share a few notes about the director, actors, and production, share a few things that I think make this film really quite special, and then highlight some things that I invite you to watch for as you watch the film. So by way of context, after World War II, when Germany was invaded by Western allies and also by the Soviet Union, there were some serious disputes that began to emerge over the future of Europe among those conquering allies. And it became clear that the Soviet Union was intent on spreading the ideology of communism and on controlling as much of Central Europe as it could. We really can start the date of the Cold War to shortly after World War II, once it becomes clear that the areas that Soviet troops entered were not going to have the same freedoms as the areas that Allied Western troops entered. And one of the results of this early battle for control over Europe was a divided post-war Germany. East Germany, which is also known as the German Democratic Republic, GDR in English, or in German it's the DDR, Deutsche Demokratische Republik, became a Soviet satellite state that enforced its Soviet ideology. It was essentially a socialist state. It didn't think of itself as directly communist, but was very closely tied to the Soviet Communist Party. And it was enforced by repression, by the presence of Soviet troops that were present in East Germany throughout most of its history. And the GDR lasted from its founding in 1949 until it collapses 40 years later in 1989. Within the GDR itself, in the eastern side of Germany, was Berlin, the capital. And Berlin, according to post-war World War II arrangements, was divided into several zones, depending on which of the victorious allies occupied that zone. And it evolves quite quickly into 2 primary zones of occupation, West Berlin and East Berlin. And so West Berlin becomes free, it becomes tied into West Germany, even though it's completely surrounded by the GDR. Because the GDR was faced with many political defections to West Berlin, that was the easiest place to defect to, because you could just cross the city from East Berlin. They decided to build a wall to limit those defections. And so the Berlin Wall is built suddenly, beginning on a Sunday morning while people were at home in 1961. And that wall had a few specific checkpoints that were quite difficult to get through. And so going from East Berlin to West Berlin became quite challenging and difficult, if not dangerous, for many people who attempted to do it. When the Soviet Union fell apart in 1990, the GDR also fell apart, and it dissolved itself in October of that year and was integrated in quite a remarkable story of unification with the Federal Republic of Germany in the West. Although the GDR was one of the more economically prosperous of the communist bloc states, it increasingly fell behind, both in terms of economy and culture and other things, behind its West German counterpart. And the government was forced to be increasingly repressive of its own citizens. And with the encouragement of the Soviet Union, the GDR developed one of the most sophisticated mechanisms for civilian control in the communist world. It was led by a specific ministry, the Ministry for State Security. The Ministry for State Security, or in German, the Staatssicherheit, was more commonly known as the Stasi, and it was headquartered in East Berlin. The Stasi thought of itself as the shield and the sword of the Socialist Party. It had a lot of employees, had close to 100,000 direct employees, but then it recruited out among the general population to find informants. And so there were at least double that number of informants who worked for the Stasi and spying on their fellow citizens. And it's at its height, about 2 to 3% of all adults in East Germany worked as Stasi informants, which meant that there was a very high likelihood that you as a East German citizen would have a file on you, some kind of file on your activities, and it was not clear exactly who were the informants that were producing that information in your file. Stasi, instead of using a lot of direct repression techniques, was very famous for its use of psychological manipulation and psychological harassment. So they would do things like break into an apartment, move things around while the tenant is away, to try to play with the mind of the tenant, maybe making some mysterious phone calls, and most of all, wiretapping phones to listen into all those conversations they could get through the phones, and also bugging apartments with microphones. In a really remarkably transparent policy decision after German unification in 1990, the Stasi headquarters, which are depicted in this film, and some of the filming is done in the Stasi headquarters. Those headquarters were turned into a museum, but a working museum, so that individual files that were collected by the Stasi in East Germany on individual citizens were opened up to those citizens. And you could go in, much like a library, and request the files that were collected on you and read through those files. I actually spent a little bit of time in the Stasi Museum in Berlin after this process became available, and was really astonished at the amount of information that was collected on a population over those 40 years. And also, you know, this really remarkable decision to open up that information to the public and let people see what the previous regime had on them. Turning to the director for a moment, Florian Henckel von Donnersmarck is a young director. This is his first feature film, and I think it's really an amazing achievement for a first film. He did spend a lot of time on it. He spent 3 years writing it and directing it. He also did it on a very small budget, only about $2 million, which is a minuscule budget for a film of this quality. And the way he was able to get away with that is that he convinced some of the more well-known actors in German theater and cinema to act for him in this film at a fraction of the normal rate that they would get paid. Although the director lived in the West, in West Germany and other places in the Western world, his parents came from East Germany. And so he grew up with this shadow of surveillance that his parents often feared coming from East Germany. And the East German regime operated not only domestically, but also abroad. They were very sensitive about that potential surveillance on them. The director also directed his second film in 2010, a Hollywood film called The Tourist. You may have heard of that film. And his third film in 2019 is a German language film called Never Look Away, which also has East German themes and also stars Sebastian Koch, who plays the director, the stage director in this film. And Never Look Away was just nominated for 2 Oscars. I think all of the acting in this movie is great, but special mention goes to Ulrich Mühe. Ulrich Mühe plays the main Stasi captain. In the film, he's named Gerd Wiesler. And he's the one that does much of the listening in this film. Mühe was actually born in East Germany. He lived in East Germany in the GDR all the way until he was 36 when the wall came down. And he also managed to become an actor in the GDR. He was a stage actor. He did his military service, which was required as a border guard at the Berlin Wall, but he was never fully bought into the system and became quite politically active at the end of the 1980s and led protests against communist rule shortly before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Mühe felt that theater in the GDR was an important space that was unlike other spaces in that country. And he once described it as the only place in the GDR where people weren't lied to. After German reunification in the 1990s, again, he was 36 at the time, he started to take on more film and TV roles. And his most famous role probably is as a long-running TV show in Germany as a forensic pathologist. Because he was an actor in the GDR and potentially subversive, he did have a Stasi file. And in 1990, he was able to go and read that Stasi file on himself in the Stasi Museum and discovered in the process of that he was under surveillance by at least 4 actors that he worked with in various theater companies, and also by his wife, who was an actress. Although not everything that his file claimed that she informed about actually turned out to be true. But he felt deeply betrayed that his wife had turned informant for the Stasi and divorced in 1990. In what I think is a sublime tragedy, Ulrich Mühe, the main actor in this film, dies of stomach cancer within just a year of this film coming out. And in fact, he was quite sick at the Academy Awards. And I wish that we would have been able to see a lot more of him. Other actors and the main actress in this film are very well known in German film and stage. So a few things that I think make this film very special. It certainly is well awarded. It got the most nominations ever for a film at the German Film Awards when it came out, and did win the Oscar for Best Foreign Film in 2006. The color scheme is quite interesting and it's subtle, but I encourage you to notice it. The director and the cinematographer use a gray and a green, kind of a olive green palette, which is meant to evoke East Berlin and communist era architecture. The sound is also very interesting. So I think it has a very subtle but powerful score. And it's set, as I mentioned, in 1984, which I think is an explicit reference to George Orwell's book, 1984. And the cinematography, I think, conveys a bit of that Orwellian dystopian setting. The person in charge of props had spent a couple of years in a Stasi prison and was very meticulous about making sure that all of the equipment and the props were authentic to East Germany in 1984. And I think that's a lovely detail. This film also has a lot of impact, some social impact beyond just the artistic impact that it has had in the movie making world. In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed, quite controversially, but revealed that there was widespread surveillance in the United States. And it's claimed that he was quite influenced in making that choice by this particular film. There was also a rebellion among Israeli intelligence agents in 2014, where several dozen agents essentially refused to work under their conditions because they were surveilling Palestinians in ways that they felt was ultimately unacceptable or inappropriate. And the authors of that protest essentially linked their watching of this film, The Lives of Others, to a conclusion that they came to, that surveillance was inappropriate, at least in the way that they were doing it. I think that this film also, in terms of structure and plot, is very finely crafted. You get a significant amount of tension out of relatively small acts, which is to the credit of the characters and the plot. Like many good films, the characters are very, very important here. And one of the things that I most appreciate is the degree of character evolution that we see. It's not universal, but several of the main characters go through some quite remarkable evolution, in part because they face deep moral dilemmas in this film. There's a lot of fear. There's fear of major consequences of their actions. And the ability to act and to use agency in a meaningful way, facing very conflicting incentives about which direction you might go, is one of the driving parts of the plot of this film. Personally, I also think that this The Lives of Others has the best closing 15 minutes of almost any film that I know of. So, closing a film is very difficult. But I really appreciate the way that this is done. A few things that I specifically encourage you to watch out for. The music, I think, is quite important. So not only the score, but music becomes an actor of sorts in this film. We learn from the director, actually, that the essence of the film started out with one scene that hits us about in the middle of the film. It's a scene where one of the main characters, the director, the stage director, plays a piano sonata on the piano. I invite you to think a little bit about why that particular scene, just a musical scene, a simple scene playing on the piano, is so central to the film, why the director might have structured the rest of the film around that, and why it serves as a bridge from what comes before to what comes after. The actor, Sebastian Koch, actually practiced that piece for weeks in order to be able to play that sonata live for that scene. There are lots of secrets in this movie, as you might expect in a surveillance-oriented movie. They range from who ties your tie to where you go at night, and when do you tell the truth, and when do you obscure it. So think a little bit about what deserves to be secret, and why you might keep something secret versus reveal the truth. Another major theme is loyalty. We see the Stasi agent in this film, the captain, being quite loyal in many cases. So why is he loyal to the system? Is he loyal to an ideal, or is he loyal to the Socialist Party? Is he loyal to particular people in that party? And how is that loyalty tested over time? So one political theme that does come out here is the theme of systems going bad, becoming corrupt. So when a system becomes corrupt, whether it be by a leader or by the wrong incentives in that system, what toll does that take on those who are loyal to the system? How does a combination of corruption and power, we see both of those in this film, put people in very, very desperate or almost impossible situations that can drive them to despair? One of the themes that comes up later in the film is the high level of suicides in the GDR. We learn that the GDR stopped publishing information about suicides in the 70s because the numbers didn't look good for it. So that becomes an important theme, and it ties into aspects of the corruption of the system. The actors, and part of their character evolution and the characters as they progress, have to act in various ways. And so free will in an authoritarian state where free will is constrained is a really interesting idea that this film explores. What makes an act of courage? What makes an act of cowardice? Under what conditions might one act with courage versus cowardice? And assuming that you can't act courageously all of the time, is it possible to ever atone for acts of cowardice? And what does it take to be washed clean from corruption or from collaboration with corrupt actors? We see several scenes of washing in this film. And I invite you to think about those as not just practical, but also symbolic of some of the broader themes of the film. Another thing that I really love in this movie and invite you to think a lot about is under what conditions do we have empathy for another person? Does the process of listening into someone's secrets provide the possibility for empathy? Does more information about somebody, particularly about an enemy, change the way that we perceive them? And if so, why would that be the case? Finally, one of my very favorite things about the lives of others is the complexity of some of the layering that goes into this film. I consider this to be a heavily layered film. And I want to suggest 3 layers to watch out for. The first is there's a theme of what makes a good man. So who is a good man in this film? It's not always immediately apparent. And if we are to judge someone as a good man, how do we know, right? What would lead us to that particular judgment? So layer 1 is the good man theme. Layer 2 comes from the title of the movie, The Lives of Others. Who are the others that the lives are about? Think carefully about who might be referenced in that title and the relationship of that to you as a viewer. And then finally, this is a movie that's directed and acted, but it also is a movie that has directors in the film and actors in the film. We have actual actors who play actors, right, and who act out a range of parts during the movie. So who in the film is acting and why are they acting? Who is directing and why are they directing? How much of that action, that acting and that direction are on the stage versus playing out in regular life that might be forced on them by a system that depends for its survival on individuals acting and on individuals directing. I think this is a really, really lovely film. It's one of my favorites, and I hope you enjoy The Lives of Others.